The wind in the high canyons of Arizona Territory did not just blow. It grieved. It was a raw, keening sound that scraped over the rimrock and tore at the frozen limbs of the juniper trees. It was the only sound Tari acknowledged. The cold was a distant thing, a fact his body registered but his mind refused to process. The snow, driven horizontal by the gale, stung his face, but he did not blink. His focus was entirely on the weight in his arms. She was wrapped in a thick deer hide, the one they had cured together 2 summers ago. The hide was already stiff with ice, making the bundle heavier, more awkward. But he did not carry her like cargo. He carried her cradled against his chest, his left arm locked beneath her shoulders and his right beneath her knees, the way he had carried her over the threshold of their wickiup when they were first mated. He was a giant of a man, towering over most settlers and even his own Apache people. His shoulders were broad enough to block the narrow canyon pass, and his strength was legend. But that strength was failing, not from the weight of the body, but from the weight of the absence. His moccasins, worn thin from the long walk away from the settlement, offered little protection against the ankle-deep snow. His feet were numb, his legs burning with an exhaustion that went bone-deep. He had been walking since sunup, after the shouting, after the crack of the rifle, after he had knelt in the dusty street of the settlement, trying to push her spirit back into the small, neat hole the bullet had made. The settlers had watched, their faces hard and closed. He had lifted her, and they had let him walk away. There was nothing left to take from him. Now, desperation was setting in. The sun was a pale smear behind the gray, churning sky. Soon it would be dark. The storm was worsening, turning from a trial into a white executioner. He could not feel his fingers. If he stopped, they would both be frozen solid by morning. He had failed to protect her in life. He would not fail to give her a proper burial, even if he had to carve the frozen earth with his own knife. But he needed shelter first. He needed fire. He trudged on, his breath pluming in front of him, each step a small eternity. The world had shrunk to the next footprint, the next gust of wind. Then he saw it. It was not a vision. It was too ugly, too real. Through the curtain of blowing snow, high on a desolate bench of land, a thin ribbon of gray smoke twisted into the white sky. It was chimney smoke, a cabin, a settler's cabin. He stopped. The wind hammered at his back, pushing him forward. He looked down at the bundle. He could not let her freeze, not like this. He adjusted her weight, ignoring the sharp protest of his muscles, and turned his face toward the smoke. Cora Bell shoved the last piece of split pine into the wood box by the hearth and kicked the stray bark chips toward the fire. At 22, she looked older. The high desert sun had weathered her skin, and solitude had etched a permanent caution around her eyes. Her cabin was small, just 1 room, but it was solid. Silas had started it, but she had finished it, chinking the logs with mud and straw herself after he was gone. It had been a year, 1 full year since the sheriff's deputy had ridden out to tell her that her husband, Silas Bell, had been shot dead over a card game in Tombstone. She had stood in this very doorway, wiping flour on her apron, and nodded. She had felt nothing, or rather, she had felt a quiet, terrible relief, and the shame of that relief had been her constant companion ever since. She moved with an efficiency born of necessity. Her life was a rotation of small, hard tasks. She checked the 3 chickens huddled in their lean-to coop, breaking the ice in their water trough with a gloved fist. She secured the latch on the shed. She measured out the last of her coffee beans. The wind was getting worse. It rattled the single glass pane in her window and whistled through a gap in the door frame she could never quite fill. This was a bad storm, the kind that could bury a house and strand a person for a week. She was mostly prepared. She had enough flour, salt pork, and firewood. But the isolation was a physical weight. Sometimes she would talk to the chickens, just to hear a voice that was not the wind. She was turning from the window, rubbing her arms for warmth. when she saw the figure. It emerged from the swirling snow at the edge of her tree line, a shape so large it seemed more bear than man. Her heart seized. She froze, her hand flying to her throat. It was a man, an Indian. Cora was not prone to hysterics, but she was a woman alone. She moved in 2 quick strides to the wall pegs and lifted the heavy double-barreled shotgun. She checked the loads, her hands shaking only slightly, and thumbed back both hammers. The metallic clicks were loud in the small cabin. She moved back to the window, keeping the shotgun leveled. He was walking slowly, stumbling, not like an attacker, but like a man at the end of his rope. He was carrying something, a large bundle, wrapped in animal hide. He was making for her cabin. "Stay back," she whispered, knowing he could not hear her. "Please, just keep walking." But he did not. He stopped about 20 yards from her door, just outside the weak circle of her fenced-in yard. He stood there, a towering silhouette against the driving snow, his head bowed. He did not raise a weapon. He did not shout. He just stood, as if waiting for her to acknowledge him. Cora watched him, the barrel of the gun resting on the window ledge. He looked exhausted. She could see the frost clinging to his black hair and the bare skin of his arm. Why was he just standing there? The tension stretched, pulled taut by the screaming wind. He was waiting for permission. Her mind raced. He could be a scout. He could be bait. But her gut, the part of her that had survived Silas and the hard winter, told her something else. This was not aggression. It was something else. She took a deep breath, held the shotgun tight, and moved to the door. She unbarred it and opened it a crack, just wide enough to see him clearly. The wind tore at the door, trying to rip it from her hand. He looked up. His face was a mask of grief. It was the most profound, hollowed-out sorrow she had ever seen. It was not the angry grief of her father-in-law, or the performative grief of the town preacher's wife. It was an absolute desolation. He was an Apache. She could see it in the high cheekbones, the set of his jaw, the long hair tied back with a simple leather thong. He was massive, his chest and shoulders built on a scale that dwarfed her own meager world. And he was freezing to death. He did not speak. He just looked at her, his eyes dark and bottomless. "What do you want?" Cora yelled over the storm. The shotgun was steady, pointed at his chest. He seemed to gather himself. His gaze dropped to the bundle in his arms, and his expression, already shattered, seemed to break further. He looked back at her. He spoke, his voice low and rough, barely audible. "Warmth, please, just for warmth." Cora hesitated. The rules of the territory were clear. You did not let a strange brave into your home. It was suicide. But the man before her looked past the point of violence. He looked like a man who had already lost everything. "You alone?" she shouted. He nodded once. "What are you carrying?" His throat worked. He looked down at the bundle again, his grip tightening. He took one step closer, stopping instantly when she raised the barrel. "My wife," he said. The words were cracked, broken by the cold. Cora's blood ran colder than the snow. She stared at the bundle, understanding. The man, Tari, took a shuddering breath. He looked past her, into the warmth of the cabin, the flickering orange light of the fire. Then his eyes met hers again, and all the pride, all the warrior's strength, collapsed. He pleaded, "I lost my wife today. Can I spend the night with you?" The raw, simple humanity of the request hit her harder than a physical blow. He was not asking as an Apache. He was asking as a widower. He was a man carrying his dead wife through a blizzard, looking for one night of shelter. Cora looked at his face, at the ice in his eyelashes, at the raw red of his hands. She looked at the bundle he held so tenderly. "God help me," she muttered. She stepped back, pulling the door open wide. "Put that on the porch, against the wall, out of the snow. Then you can come in, but the gun stays on you." He did not question. He moved to the small, covered porch and with agonizing gentleness, placed the deer hide bundle against the cabin wall, brushing the fresh snow from it with his bare hand. He stood for a moment, his hand resting on the hide, and then he turned and walked to the open door. He stepped inside. The cabin instantly felt tiny, claustrophobic. He filled the space, his head nearly brushing the low rafters. He stood by the door, dripping melting snow onto her clean-swept floorboards, his hands hanging limp at his sides. He did not move toward the fire. He did not look at her. He just stood, breathing in the warm, dry air. Cora bolted the door behind him. The sound of the heavy wooden bar sliding into place was deafening. There they were, a lone white widow and a giant Apache warrior, trapped by the storm. Cora kept the shotgun in her hands. "Sit by the fire," she said, her voice tight. She gestured with the barrel. "Don't touch anything." He obeyed, moving slowly, as if his joints were frozen. He did not sit on her one stool or her cot. He sank to the floor, sitting cross-legged on the stone hearth, turning his hands over to the flames. He was unarmed, she noted, save for a knife sheathed at his hip. The silence in the cabin was heavier than the snow piling up outside. The only sounds were the crackle of the burning pine and the relentless howl of the wind. Cora did not sit. She stood by the table, the shotgun resting in the crook of her arm. She watched him. He was younger than she first thought, perhaps 30. His face, in the firelight, was etched with exhaustion. He did not look at her. He stared into the flames as if searching for something he had lost there. The kettle on the stove began to whistle, a sharp, piercing sound that made them both jump. The tension was unbearable. "You hungry?" Cora asked. Her voice sounded strange. He shook his head, a small, barely perceptible motion. Cora moved to the stove anyway, never turning her back on him completely. She spooned coffee grounds into the pot. She needed to do something, some normal, human task. She poured 2 tin cups of the steaming black liquid. It was bitter, thrice boiled, but it was hot. She walked over to him. He looked up as she approached. She stopped a few feet away, holding out the cup. He looked at her hand, then at the cup, as if he did not understand the gesture. Slowly, he reached out and took it, his fingers, raw and split from the cold, brushed hers. His skin was like ice. He held the cup, letting the steam rise into his face, breathing it in. He did not drink. "My name is Cora Bell," she said, needing to fill the silence. He nodded. He looked back at the fire. "Tari," he said. His voice was a low rumble. They said nothing else for hours. Cora eventually sat on her cot. The shotgun laid across her lap. Tari did not move from the hearth. He just stared at the fire. Holding the cold cup of coffee, the storm raged, sealing them in. Darkness fell, absolute and suffocating. Cora lit the single kerosene lamp, its yellow glow pushing back the shadows but not the tension. She ate a piece of hardtack, her stomach churning. He refused food again. Finally, it was time to sleep. A new, terrible awkwardness set in. "You take the hearth," Cora said, her voice sounding unnaturally loud. "There are blankets in that box." He nodded, acknowledging her. Cora lay down on her cot, fully clothed, pulling her own quilt up to her chin. The shotgun was on the floor beside her, her hand resting on the cold stock. She lay in the dark, her eyes wide open, listening, the wind, the house creaking, and the sound of the man's breathing, low and steady, just 10 feet away. She was sharing her cabin with a savage, a man whose people were at war with hers, a man who was, at this very moment, lost in a grief she could not comprehend. She must have drifted off, lulled by the rhythmic roar of the storm. But something woke her. A sound. She tensed, her fingers tightening on the shotgun. The fire had burned down to embers, casting a faint, dying red light. The cabin was filled with shadows. It came again. It was not a threat. It was not a movement. It was the sound of weeping. It was so quiet she almost missed it. A low, guttural sound, like something being torn apart deep inside. It was him. Tari. He was on his side, his back to her, his massive shoulders shaking in the dim light. He was trying to be silent, choking the sobs in his throat, but the pain was too large to be contained. Cora lay perfectly still, her own breath caught in her chest. She listened to the broken, muffled sounds of a strong man's heart emptying itself into the dark. The sound unlocked something in her. It bypassed the fear, the prejudice, the shotgun by her bed. It went straight to the cold, hard knot of her own buried sorrow. She thought of Silas. She remembered the last night she had seen him alive. He had come home from town, drunk and furious. He had lost again. He had lost the last of her inheritance, the small pouch of silver dollars her mother had left her. When she had cried, had pleaded with him, he had backhanded her across the face. He had grabbed her, his fingers biting into her arms, his breath sour with whiskey, and had taken what he wanted. He had always taken what he wanted. When the deputy told her Silas was dead, she had cried, but they were not tears of grief. They were tears of shame. Shame that she was free. Shame that another human being's death was the best thing that had ever happened to her. She had not wept for love lost. She had wept because she had never had it. Cora closed her eyes, the stranger's quiet sobs mixing with the howl of the wind. She listened to him mourn his wife, and in the freezing, dangerous dark, she felt a flicker of something she had not felt in a very long time. She was not alone. The morning brought no relief. The world outside the window was gone, replaced by a solid, churning wall of white. The storm had not broken. It had settled in, suffocating the landscape. Cora woke stiff and cold. She sat up, her eyes immediately flying to the hearth. He was gone. Her heart hammered. She grabbed the shotgun. The blankets were folded neatly on the stone. The front door was unbarred. Fool, she hissed at herself, scrambling off the cot. She had let him in, and he had stolen. What? She looked around. Nothing was missing. The knife he wore was gone, but it was his. She crept to the door and peered through the small gap. The wind snatched her breath away. The porch was empty. The bundle, his wife, was gone. A knot of dread tightened in her stomach. Where had he gone? No one could survive in this. She pulled on her heavy coat and boots, wrapped a wool scarf around her face, and grabbed the shotgun. She had to check the chickens. She shoved the door open and stepped into a nightmare. The snow was waist-deep, drifted hard against the cabin. She waded through it, the cold burning her legs, and fought her way to the lean-to. The chickens were alive, huddled and miserable. As she turned back, a movement at the edge of her property caught her eye. It was him, Tari. He was standing near the small stand of scrub oaks that marked the boundary of her land. He was dark and still against the frantic white of the storm. He was looking at the ground. Cora waded through the heavy drift, the shotgun held ready, though she no longer felt afraid. As she got closer, she saw what he had done. The ground was frozen iron, impossible to dig. He had built a grave. He had gathered stones, sweeping the snow off them, prying them from the frozen earth with his knife and his bare, bleeding hands. He had piled them high and neat, a traditional Apache cairn, protecting the body he must have laid beneath it. He had buried his wife just beyond her tree line. He did not seem to hear her approach. He was utterly still, his head bowed, paying his last respects. He had done this in the heart of the blizzard, a final act of devotion. Cora stopped about 10 yards away. She did not want to intrude. She lowered the shotgun. She watched him, this strange man who had shared her floor, and felt the immense weight of his loss. He had asked only for warmth, and in the morning, he had performed this impossible, heartbreaking task. He stood there for a long time, the snow collected on his shoulders and in his hair. Finally, as if feeling her gaze, He turned. His face was ravaged. The cold had burned his skin, but his eyes were ancient with sorrow. He looked at her, standing there in the snow, holding her gun. He did not speak. He did not need to. Cora looked from his face to the fresh pile of stones. She thought of Silas, buried in a potter's field in Tombstone, a grave she had never seen and never would. Tari took a step toward the cabin. He was finished. His duty was done. He looked as if he was ready to walk back into the storm and disappear. Cora raised her chin. She gestured with her head, back toward the cabin, back toward the chimney smoke, back toward the fire. "The coffee is on," she said, her voice clear and steady over the wind. He stared at her for a long moment. Then, slowly, he nodded. He walked past her, his head high, and she fell into step behind him. The silent, fragile trust had begun. The snow did not stop. It fell for a second day, and then a third. The world beyond the single pane of glass became an abstract, shifting landscape of white and gray. The wind had quieted from a scream to a low, mournful moan, but the flakes drifted down, thick and relentless, burying the trees, the path, and the small stone grave. Inside the cabin, a strange, quiet rhythm established itself. The space was too small for avoidance. They moved around each other with a careful, necessary choreography. Cora cooked, her movements economical. Tari kept the wood box full, venturing onto the porch to retrieve logs from the dwindling stack, his every return marked by a blast of frigid air and a dusting of white. He ate what she offered, grits and salt pork in the morning, a thin rabbit stew at night. He ate with a quiet deliberation, his eyes on his plate. The shotgun still leaned against the wall by Cora's cot, but she no longer kept her hand on it. On the third morning, Cora was kneading dough for biscuits. The cabin was warm, filled with the smell of coffee and burning pine. Tari sat on the hearth, mending a tear in his soaked moccasin with a small awl from his belt and a strand of sinew. He worked with an intense, patient focus. Cora found herself watching his hands. They were huge, the knuckles scarred, the skin rough, but his movements were precise, delicate even. He was not the savage of her childhood fears, the boogeyman her father had described. He was a man mending his shoe. The silence, which had at first been a heavy, suffocating blanket of fear, was changing. It was becoming a shared space. "He did a good job on this cabin," Tari said, his voice low. He ran a hand over the smooth, fitted logs of the chimney breast. Cora started, surprised he had spoken first. "My husband started it. I finished it." Tari looked at her, his dark eyes taking in the neat chinking, the solid shelf she had built. He nodded slowly. "You finished it well." It was a simple compliment, but it landed on her like a warm stone. Silas had never praised her work. He had only pointed out what was wrong. She dusted the flour from her hands. "The storm looks to be settling." "It will snow for one more day," he said. It was not a guess. It was a statement of fact. He looked back at the fire. "Then the cold will come." Later that afternoon, the quiet pressed in on her. She looked out the window. The snow had almost completely covered the pile of rocks. The sight of it sent a sharp, unexpected pang of sorrow through her. She turned to find Tari watching her, his gaze fixed on her face. He had seen where she was looking. "You should not have had to do that," she said, her voice softer than she intended. "To bury her in this—" He looked away, his jaw tightening. He said nothing for a long time. The only sound, the hiss of the fire. Cora thought he would not answer. She turned back to her washing, ashamed she had spoken. "It was not the storm," he said, his voice a low rumble. "It was the town." Cora stopped, her hands submerged in the gray, soapy water. "We were trading," he said, his eyes distant, locked on a memory she could not see. I traded 3 cured deer hides for coffee, sugar, and flour. Nita, my wife, she liked sweet coffee." He paused, and Cora could feel the effort it took him to keep his voice steady. "We were leaving. A man. He ran from the mercantile. He shouted. He said she had stolen a sack of flour. He grabbed her." Tari's hand, the one not holding the moccasin, clenched into a fist so tight his knuckles went white. "She did not steal. I paid. I had the receipt from the trader. But the man did not care. He was drunk. He pushed her. Nita, she was small. She fell. Her head hit the wagon wheel." He stopped. The cabin was utterly silent. Cora could not breathe. "He said she was a thief, that she got what she deserved. His friends came. They had rifles. They laughed. They told me to take my thieving wife and get out before they shot me, too." He turned his gaze from the fire to Cora. His eyes were not filled with tears. They were filled with a cold, dead emptiness that terrified her more than any rage. "I tried to buy a box from the carpenter. I wanted to bury her in their graveyard. I had $2 silver. I offered it. They said they would hang me. They said if I did not leave the settlement, they would hang me and throw her body in the street for the dogs." He looked down at his hands. "So I walked." Cora leaned against the washtub, her knees weak. She felt sick, a cold, awful sickness that started in her stomach and spread through her chest. She had grown up in Ohio, been fed a steady diet of stories about Indian raids, about their savagery, their danger. She had been taught to fear them, to see them as less than human, something to be cleared from the land like unwanted brush. But this man, whose wife had been murdered for nothing, who had been denied the right to bury her, who had carried her body through a blizzard rather than leave her to be desecrated, was the gentlest man she had ever met. He was respectful. He was grieving. He had not laid a hand on her, had not even looked at her with anything but a distant, polite sadness. The foundations of her world, the things she believed were true, cracked. That is a sin," she whispered, the words sounding small and useless. Tari looked at her, a flicker of surprise in his eyes. He seemed to truly see her for the first time, not as a white woman, not as a potential threat, but as a person. He gave a small, bitter nod. "God was not in that town," he said. Then he returned to mending his shoe. The storm began to clear on the 4th day. The snowfall lessened, and a weak, watery sunlight tried to break through the thick clouds. The cold, as Tari had predicted, intensified. The air had a new, sharp bite to it. Cora noticed him wincing as he worked the sinew. He kept flexing his fingers, trying to get the stiffness out. She looked closer. His hands, the ones he had used to claw stones from the frozen earth, were in a terrible state. The skin was cracked and bleeding. The tips of his fingers were a dark, waxy black. "You have frostbite," she said, setting her coffee cup down. He glanced at his hands and curled them into fists. "It is nothing." "It is not nothing," she snapped, with a sudden authority that surprised them both. "It will turn to gangrene if you do not care for it. You will lose them." He stared at her, unused to being ordered. "Sit," she said, pointing to the stool. "And do not argue with me." He hesitated. Then, slowly, he sat. Cora went to her small medicine chest. It held little more than tincture of iodine, some dried herbs, and a small tin of bear grease salve her mother had taught her to make. She brought the tin and a bowl of warm water and clean rags to the table. "Give me your hands," she said. He unfolded his fists and placed his hands on the table, palms up. They were massive, covering the small space. She gently took his right hand in hers. His skin was rough as raw timber and cold, even by the fire. She dipped a rag in the warm water and began to wash away the dried blood and dirt. He hissed as the water touched the raw flesh. "Hold still," she murmured. She worked carefully, cleaning the cuts, her touch as light as she could make it. The blackness at his fingertips frightened her. It was deep. She dried his hand gently. then scooped a generous amount of the salve. It melted from the heat of her fingers. She began to rub it into his skin, working it into the cracks, over the raw knuckles, and across the deadened, frozen tips. It was the most intimate thing she had ever done. She was aware of everything, the roughness of his palm against hers, the way his muscles tensed under her touch, the sheer size of him, and the quiet way he submitted to her care. Her fingers, small and pale against his dark, damaged skin, lingered on his wrist. She felt the steady, slow pulse of his blood beneath her thumb. A strange, unfamiliar warmth spread up her arm, settling low in her belly. She quickly finished and wrapped his hand in a clean strip of cotton. She looked up to find him watching her, his gaze intense, unblinking. She felt a hot blush rise from her neck, flooding her face. She immediately let go of his hand and snatched up the rag. "I am sorry," she stammered, though she did not know what she was apologizing for. "For what?" he asked, his voice quiet. "For nothing." She reached for his other hand, her movements brisk, businesslike. "Just for touching you." He did not reply. He simply watched her as she tended to his other hand, his expression unreadable. The next day, the sun finally broke through. It was a blinding, brilliant light, reflecting off the vast, unbroken expanse of white. The world was beautiful and deadly. Tari went out. He needed to move. He took Silas's old axe from the shed, a tool Cora had not touched since his death, and began to clear a path to the chicken coop and the wood pile. Cora watched him through the window as she washed the breakfast tins. He moved with a powerful grace, sinking the axe head deep into the frozen drifts, clearing away. After the path was cut, he turned to the wood pile. He had used much of her split wood. He uncovered the large, unsplit rounds of pine and set one on the block. He pulled off his heavy deer-hide shirt. Cora stopped washing. She stood, tin in hand, and stared. The cold air steamed off his bare torso. He was magnificent. His back and shoulders were a map of corded muscle, copper skin pulled taut over a frame built for power and endurance. He raised the axe, his entire body coiling, and brought it down with a grunt. The log split clean in two. He set another, again. The axe rose and fell, the muscles in his back shifting and bunching with the effort. Cora's mouth went dry. She had never seen a man like him. Silas had been soft in the middle, his arms thin, the sight of Tari, all raw strength and masculine purpose, woke something in her body she did not know existed. It was a low, pulling hunger that made her feel dizzy. She felt a wave of profound shame. She was a widow. This was an Indian, a savage, her mind whispered, though she no longer believed it. What kind of woman was she? To look at him like this, to feel this heat, while his wife's body was frozen in the earth just yards away. She turned from the window, her heart hammering against her ribs. She felt dirty, tainted. But she could not stop the image of him in the snow, steam rising from his skin, the axe splitting the wood. She could not stop the feeling. That night, the cabin was colder than it had been. With the sky clear, the temperature had plummeted. The fire, though banked high, fought a losing battle against the frost creeping up the inside of the window. Cora huddled on her cot, wrapped in every blanket she owned, and still she shivered. Tari sat by the fire, his bandaged hands held out, but she could see the tremors running through him, too. They sat in silence for a long time. The tension was back, but it was different. It was no longer fear. It was an awareness, a crackling, unspoken thing that had been born of her touch, of his gaze, of her watching him at the woodpile. "Your hands," she said, her voice small. "Are they better?" He flexed them. "The pain is less. You have healing hands." She looked down at her own lap. "My mother taught me about herbs, salves." He nodded. The silence stretched again. "Why are you here?" he asked, not turning from the fire. This place, it is far from the town. A woman alone. It was my husband's land, she said, her voice flat. His claim. He is gone. It was a statement, not a question. Yes, he died, a year ago, in Tombstone. Tari turned to look at her. His gaze was steady. Seeing, you do not grieve him. Cora's head snapped up, defensive. You do not know that. You know nothing about me. I know grief, he said simply. I saw it in your face the first night, but it was not for him. It was for yourself. The truth of it hit her. She looked away, her throat tightening. He was not a good man? Tari asked, his voice gentle. Cora's hands clenched in the quilt. She said nothing. She heard Silas's voice in her head, thick with whiskey, telling her she was useless, telling her she was his, to do with as he pleased. She felt the phantom ache of his fingers on her arm. He was a gambler, she said, the words tasting like ash. He drank. He lost everything. My inheritance. This land was all we had left. And he was angry. She stopped. She had never spoken of this. Not to the preacher, not to the sheriff, not even to her own sister in letters. It was a wife's duty to bear her husband's nature. It was her shame. He was angry, she repeated, her voice trembling. When he lost, when he drank, he would come to me, and he would. She could not say the word. She choked on it. Tears, hot and sudden, welled in her eyes and spilled down her cheeks. He forced himself on me, she whispered. The words were out. They hung in the air, small and terrible, but real. She had said it aloud. She began to weep, silent, racking sobs that shook her frame. She hid her face in her hands, ashamed of her weakness, ashamed of the truth. She heard movement. She tensed, her old fear of Silas, of a man's anger, rising up in her. But Tari did not yell. He did not touch her. He had moved from the hearth to sit on the floor beside her cot. He was close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body. But he made no move to comfort her. He just sat, his presence solid, waiting. She cried for a long time, emptying the poison of years. When her sobs finally quieted into shudders, she wiped her face, feeling raw and exposed. She looked at him. He was watching her, his expression one of profound, quiet understanding. There was no pity in his eyes, only recognition. He made you small, Tari said, his voice a low rumble, so he could feel tall. Cora stared at him. He had taken all her shame, all her complicated pain, and distilled it into one simple truth. No man, Tari said softly, leaning an inch closer, but still not touching, should break a woman to feel strong. His words settled over her, a balm on a wound she had thought was fatal. He understood. He did not judge her. He did not blame her. That night, the cold was too deep. Cora could not stop shivering on her cot. Tari, on the hearth, was rigid with it, his bandaged hands tucked under his arms. Cora made a decision. She stood up, dragging her quilts and the extra furs from the box. She laid them out on the floor, on the wide, warm stones of the hearth, as close to the fire as she could get. She made a thick, wide bed. She lay down, pulling the furs over her. Tari watched her, his expression guarded. It is warmer here, she said, her voice even. There is room. It was an invitation. It was practical. It was, she knew, something more. He looked at her for a long moment, reading her face in the firelight. Then he stood, took his one blanket, and walked to the pallet of furs. He lay down beside her, not touching, but close enough that his body blocked the draft from the door. He lay on his back, staring at the rafters. Cora lay on her side, facing the fire, intensely aware of the large, warm body just behind her. She could hear him breathe. She could feel the solid presence of him. She waited for the fear to come, for the shame, for the memory of Silas. But there was nothing. Only the sound of the fire, the quiet breathing of the man beside her, and the immense, shared warmth. She was not afraid. She did not move away. Cora closed her eyes, and for the first time in over a year, she felt something new. It was not safety, not yet, but it was the beginning of it. The hard, frozen boundary inside her had begun to shift. The thaw began on the 5th day. It came not as a gentle promise of spring, but as a threat. The world, which had been silenced by the snow, was now filled with the sound of dripping. Water trickled from the eaves, from the high branches of the pines. The snowpack on the roof creaked and groaned, shifting its heavy weight. Cora heard it and her stomach tightened. The sound of the melting was the sound of the world returning. For 4 days, the cabin had been an island, a universe unto itself containing only 2 people. They had moved beyond the awkwardness, settling into a shared domesticity. They slept on the hearth pallet every night, the warmth of their bodies a shared defense against the bitter cold. They never touched, but the space between them had shrunk from miles to inches. The air was charged with a quiet awareness. He was a man. She was a woman. Grief had been their chaperone, but it was slowly, inevitably, leaving the room. Now, the sound of the thaw signaled an end. It meant the pass would be clear. It meant the mail rider, Mr. Abernathy, would make his run. It meant the world, with its rules and its judgment, would come knocking. Cora looked at Tari. He was sitting by the open door, the brighter, colder light of the clear morning carving his profile from the shadows. He was sharpening his knife on a whetstone, his bandaged hands moving with practiced, steady strokes. He, too, was listening to the dripping. He knew what it meant. She was not ready. The thought was a sudden, sharp panic. She had spent a year praying for the isolation to end, for someone to talk to, for the world to notice her. Now she dreaded it. This quiet, dangerous, gentle man had become her only shield against that world. When he left, the cabin would be colder and emptier than it had ever been. Tari finished with the stone. He tested the blade against his thumb, his expression unreadable. He stood, his full height seeming to blot out the morning sun. He slid the knife into its sheath. He turned, and his eyes met hers. He was preparing to leave. He picked up the heavy deer-hide shirt he had worn, which she had cleaned and dried by the fire. He had mended his moccasins. His few possessions were gathered. "The snow is hard now," he said, his voice a low rumble. "I can walk on the crust." "The pass is not clear," Cora said, her voice too thin. It was a weak protest. "It is clear enough. I have stayed too long." He looked around the small cabin, at the hearth, at her cot, at the table. He was memorizing it, or perhaps saying goodbye to it. He stepped toward her, stopping a respectful few feet away. His gaze was direct, heavy. "You saved my life, Cora Bell," he said. "You tended my hands. You gave me fire. You let me bury my wife. I have nothing to pay you." "I do not want payment," she whispered, her hands twisting in her apron. The space he would leave behind felt like a physical wound. "I will go now," he said. He nodded once, a gesture of finality, and turned toward the door. "No." The word was out before she could stop it. It was sharp, desperate. He paused, his back to her. "Do not go," she said, stepping forward. "Please, do not go yet." He turned slowly. His face was a mask of confusion, his dark eyes searching hers. "Abernathy will come. The mail rider. Others will follow. They cannot find me here. I do not care. They will call you." He paused, searching for the word. "They will say you are a soiled woman. They will shun you. Or worse." "Let them—" She took another step, her heart hammering so hard she thought he must hear it. "I have been shunned my whole life. I was shunned by my husband. I was shunned by the town for being his wife. I have been alone. I am used to being alone. But I am not. She faltered, looking at his broad chest, at the strong column of his throat, anywhere but his eyes. I am not afraid, she finished, the words finally coming out, strong and clear. She met his gaze. Not anymore. I am not afraid of them, and I am not afraid of you. Tari stared at her. He saw the truth in her eyes. He saw the fear she was pushing past, the reckless, raw bravery of a woman who had nothing left to lose and had just found something she wanted to keep. He saw her shame from the other night, and he saw her defiance of it now. She was not just offering him shelter. She was offering him her. He moved. It was one long stride, and he was in front of her. He did not grab her. He did not demand. He lifted his bandaged hands, his touch hesitant, and cupped her face. His calloused thumbs brushed the high curves of her cheekbones. His skin was rough, warm. She did not flinch. She did not pull away. She leaned into his touch, her eyes closing. He lowered his head. The kiss was slow. It was full of uncertainty. A question asked in a language neither of them truly knew. It was the taste of wood smoke, of coffee, of 5 days of shared silence. It was chapped lips and trembling breath. Then the uncertainty broke. The heat that had been building for days, banked like embers under the ash of their grief, finally caught air. It was not a gentle kiss. It was a claiming, the suppressed longing, the sight of him in the snow, the sound of his weeping in the dark, the shared warmth of the palate. It all erupted. A low sound, half moan, half sob, tore itself from Cora's throat. She pressed herself against him, her hands fisting in the fabric of his shirt, clinging to him as if he were the only solid thing in a collapsing world. His hands, no longer gentle, slid from her face into her hair, pulling the pins free, his fingers tangling in the heavy brown mass. He kissed her deeper, a desperate, hungry claiming that sent a bolt of fire straight to her core. He pulled her against the unyielding wall of his chest, and she could feel the heavy, frantic pounding of his heart matching her own. He broke the kiss only to bury his face in her neck, his breathing ragged. "Cora," he rasped, the sound of her name on his tongue a physical touch. "Do not leave me," she pleaded, her voice thick. He answered by lifting her. She weighed nothing to him. He carried her the 2 steps to the hearth, to the pallet of furs that had been their chaste bed, and laid her down. The firelight danced over them, painting their skin in shades of orange and red. He did not tear at her clothes, as Silas would have done. He moved with a deliberate, trembling reverence. His bandaged hands were clumsy as he worked the small buttons of her dress, but his touch was tender. She watched his face in the flickering light. The deep lines of his grief were still there, but they were softened now by a different, sharper need. He undressed her, his eyes worshipping every pale inch of her. She was thin, her ribs showing beneath her skin, her body marked by a life of hardship, but he looked at her as if she were perfect. When she lay bare on the furs, she reached for him, her own hands shaking. She pulled his shirt over his head, her fingers tracing the hard ridges of muscle on his shoulders and chest. She touched the old, white scars, and then the newer, red wounds on his hands. She brought his fingers to her lips and kissed the bandages she had wrapped. He shuddered at the contact. They came together not in a clash of lust, but in a desperate, imperfect collision of need. It was hungry. The hunger of 2 people starved, one for life, the other for tenderness. It was tender, his massive strength controlled, his movements careful, as if he knew her history, as if he was actively erasing the memory of Silas's violence. And it was desperate, a frantic attempt to forge a bond strong enough to hold back the melting world outside. He moved within her, slow and deep, his eyes locked on hers. He was showing her what he had meant. No man should break a woman to feel strong. He was making her feel whole. Cora cried out, not in pain, but in a release so profound it felt like her soul was unlatching. She clung to his shoulders, meeting his rhythm, claiming him as fiercely as he claimed her. They moved by the fire, two outcasts, two halves of a shared sorrow, finding a brief, burning solace in the eye of the storm. The next morning, the cabin was still. The dripping outside had stopped. The air was frigid again, the thaw having frozen in the night. Cora woke slowly, wrapped in furs and the heavy arm of the man beside her. She was pressed against Terry's back, her face against his warm skin. He was asleep, his breathing deep and even. For the first time in her life, Cora Bell woke feeling entirely safe. She lay there, absorbing the feeling. The pallet was theirs now. The cabin was theirs. She smiled, a small, sleepy thing, and closed her eyes. A horse snorted. Cora's eyes flew open. It was not a dream, a horse, outside, close. "Tari!" she hissed, shaking his shoulder. "Tari, wake up! Someone is here!" He was awake instantly. There was no grogginess. He went from sleep to coiled readiness in a second. He was on his feet, pulling on his leggings, his eyes flashing to the door. "Abernathy?" Cora whispered, scrambling for her own clothes. Her dress was in a heap. Her hands were shaking so hard she could not work the buttons. "The mail rider. He is early." A heavy fist pounded on the door. "Cora Bell, you alive in there? Got a catalog for you from St. Louis." Cora froze, clutching the dress to her chest. Tari stood by the hearth, a silent, deadly shadow. He looked at her, his expression grim. "Miss Bell?" The pounding came again. "I am not freezing my beard off out here for nothing." "Just a moment. Mr. Abernathy," Cora called out, her voice high and tight. She fumbled with the buttons. Just dressing." She looked around, frantic. Tari was too big to hide. The cabin was one room. "Get on the cot," she whispered. Pretend you were sleeping there." Tari's expression darkened, but he did as she asked, moving to the cot and sitting on the edge, pulling a blanket over his lap. Cora ran a hand through her tangled hair, tucked the stray strands back, and tried to slow her breathing. She unbarred the door and opened it. Elias Abernathy stood there, a blizzard of a man, his beard crusted with ice. He was chewing tobacco, his small eyes sharp. "Took you long enough, widow," he grunted. He looked past her, into the cabin. His eyes landed on Tari. Abernathy stopped chewing. His gaze swept from the massive Apache on the cot to the rumpled, hastily made pallet of furs on the hearth. He looked back at Cora, at her flushed face and tangled hair. A slow, ugly smirk spread across his face. Well, he said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial leer. "Looks like the storm was not so lonely for you after all. Found yourself some company, have you?" Cora's face burned. The blood drained from it, then rushed back in a hot wave of shame. He is my hired help," she stammered, the lie tasting like poison. He was caught in the storm, clearing the woodpile. Abernathy let out a short, barking laugh. He spat a stream of brown tobacco juice onto the clean snow near her step. "Hired help. Right. Since when do you hire on Apache bucks? Cora? And since when does the hired help sleep on the cot?" "He was cold," Cora said, clutching the doorframe. "I am a Christian woman. Mr. Abernathy, I offered him shelter." "Oh, I am sure you offered him plenty." Abernathy chuckled. He pushed the rolled catalog into her hand. "You be careful, girl. That kind of help will get you burned out. Or worse." He tipped his hat in a mockery of respect, his eyes lingering on Tari one last time. "You have a good day, ma'am. Try to stay warm." He turned, still laughing to himself, and mounted his horse. Cora stood in the doorway, the catalog clenched in her fist, and watched him ride away, his laughter echoing in the bright, cold air. She closed the door, The heavy thud of the bar sliding into place felt final. The cabin was silent. The warmth of the morning was gone. The air was frigid, toxic. Tari had not moved from the cot. He was staring at the floor, his face carved from stone. Cora leaned against the door, her knees shaking. The shame was suffocating. She had lied. She had belittled him. She had reduced what had happened between them, that desperate, tender miracle, into a dirty transaction with hired help. She could not look at him. She moved to the stove, her movements jerky, automatic. She had to do something, make coffee, wash the tins, anything. "He is just a mean-spirited gossip," she said to the wall, her voice brittle. "He does not mean anything. No one will believe him." Tari said nothing. "If anyone else comes," she went on, her voice rising in pitch, "I will just tell them the truth, that you were stranded, that you worked for your keep. That is what I will say. I will say you cut all that wood. They will see the wood. They will understand." She was babbling, practicing her excuses, trying to build a wall of words around her shame. "They will understand I was just being charitable." She heard the sound of movement. She turned. Tari was on his feet. He was pulling on his hide shirt. He grabbed his mended moccasins. "What are you doing?" she asked, her heart stopping. "You heard him. He is a gossip. It does not matter." "It matters," Tari said. His voice was flat, dead. The warmth was gone. The man who had held her by the fire was gone. This was the stranger from the canyon again, the man of ice and grief. "Tari, no, please!" She moved toward him. "I was scared. That is all. I was just scared of what he would say." "You were scared he would see the truth." Tari corrected her. He did not look at her. He moved to the door and unbarred it. The bright, blinding light of the snow-covered world flooded the cabin. "Where are you going?" she cried. "Away from here." "You cannot. The pass is not safe. It is too cold." He stepped out onto the porch, into the sunlight that offered no warmth. "I have walked in worse." She ran after him, desperation clawing at her throat. "No, wait, I did not mean it. What I said, hired help, I did not mean it." He was already walking, his strides long and powerful, carrying him away from the cabin, away from her. She ran. She forgot her boots, her coat. She ran out onto the snow in her stocking feet. The frozen crust was sharp, biting, burning her skin, but she did not feel it. "Tari!" she screamed, stumbling through the drift he had cleared. "Tari, please, do not leave me. Wait!" He stopped at the edge of the tree line, near the small, silent cairn of stones. He stopped, but he did not turn around. His back was a rigid wall. She caught up to him, sobbing, her breath clouding in the freezing air. She grabbed his arm. "Please," she begged, clinging to him. "I love you. Do not go. I love you." He stood for a long moment. She felt a tremor run through his arm, but he did not turn. He looked at the grave of his wife, then at the smoking chimney of the cabin. He gently, firmly, removed her hand from his arm. "You belong in their world, Cora Bell," he said, his voice rough with a final, terrible sadness. "The world of lies and shame." He looked at her then, just once, his eyes full of the grief she had first seen, the grief she had thought she could heal. "I never will." He turned and walked into the trees. He did not run. He just walked, his large frame moving steadily, until the pines swallowed him, and he was gone. Cora stood alone, barefoot in the snow. The pain in her feet began to register, a sharp, distant agony. The cold was a physical blow, stealing her breath. She watched the spot where he had disappeared until her eyes burned from the cold and the tears. He was gone. She stumbled back to the cabin, each step a small death. She fell inside, barring the door against the bright, cruel world. She collapsed against it, sliding to the floor. The cabin was hollow, It was no longer a sanctuary. It was a tomb. The pallet of furs by the hearth, where she had woken in his arms only an hour before, was just a pile of empty skins. She wrapped her arms around her knees, pressed her face against the rough wood of the door, and broke down. The silence of the empty cabin was louder than any storm. Days turned into a week. The cabin, once a sanctuary, became a cell. Cora could not sleep. She lay on the cold cot, staring at the pallet of furs by the hearth. It was an unburied corpse, a monument to her lie. She could not bring herself to move it, nor could she sleep on it. Every sound was his ghost. The creak of the wind in the chimney was his low voice. The drip of the thaw from the eaves was the sound of him walking away. The snap of a burning log was the sound of his heart breaking. She moved like an automaton. She fed the chickens. She split the wood he had left, the axe feeling heavy and alien in her hands. She ate, but the food was ash in her mouth. She was consumed by a cold, hollowing shame. He had seen her, all her broken, hidden pieces. He had not flinched. He had held her, healed her, and in return, she had named him hired help. She had thrown his dignity back in his face to save her own meager reputation, and in doing so, she had lost both. On the 8th day after he left, the world returned. It came in the form of 2 riders, Mr. Hatcher and his son, young Elias. They were neighbors from 5 miles down the canyon, men Cora had traded eggs with twice a year. They did not tip their hats when she opened the door. Mrs. Bell, Hatcher said. He was a gaunt man, his piety a weapon. His eyes swept the interior of her cabin, lingering on the pallet of furs. Mr. Hatcher, Elias. Cora kept her voice flat. She did not move from the doorway. We heard disturbing reports, Hatcher said, his gaze returning to her. From Mr. Abernathy. Reports of you keeping company. Unnatural company. The heat rose in Cora's face, but it was not shame. It was a slow, burning acid. I offered shelter during the storm, as any Christian would. Abernathy said it was an Apache buck, Elias put in, spitting on the ground near her step. He was a boy of 19, already rotten with his father's righteousness. Said you looked cozy. Said you called him hired help. Hatcher's eyes narrowed. We do not abide by that filth here, Mrs. Bell. This is a white territory, a God-fearing territory. Your husband, God rest him, may have been a sinner, but he was a white man. The implication hung in the cold air. You are harboring a savage, Hatcher continued. Abernathy saw the look of him. We believe it was Tari, the brave whose wife was killed in town. He is a murderer. Likely, he is dangerous. He was grieving, Cora said, her voice shaking with a cold fury. He was unarmed, and he is gone. Gone where? Hatcher pressed. Did he go back to his people? Are there more of them? He is gone, Cora repeated. She stepped back and reached for the shotgun by the door. She did not raise it, but held it, the stock resting on the floor, her hand on the barrel. And you are on my land. Get off! Hatcher's eyes widened. He had come expecting a shamed, weeping widow. He found something else. You mark my words. Mrs. Bell, he said, his voice low. We will be speaking to Marshal Kane in Prescott. We will not have an Indian lover living in this canyon. You will be burned out, or you will be hanged right alongside him. They turned their horses and rode away. Cora bolted the door. She leaned against it, the heavy shotgun a comfort in her hands. The world Tari had warned her about was here. It had a face and a name, and it had just threatened her life. She was not afraid. She was furious. The last thread connecting her to that world, to its rules and its judgments, snapped. Tari had walked for 2 days, his heart a cold stone in his chest. The pain of her lie was worse than the blizzard. It was a betrayal that confirmed his deepest fear, that there was no place for him. He was a ghost, tolerated in neither the white world nor the one he had lost. He found them in a ravine 20 miles south, near the half-built railroad line. They were Apache, but not his people. They were reservation runaways, dispossessed families, a few warriors stripped of their purpose, all reduced to picking up scrap iron for the railroad foreman. They were paid in whiskey and spoiled flour. He was taken in without question. They recognized the look in his eyes. He was another broken piece of their shattered world. He did not speak. He just worked. He hauled rusted lengths of track, his muscles screaming, his hands, still raw from the frostbite, splitting open inside the cotton bandages. He did not care. The physical pain was a welcome distraction. At night, he sat by their weak, smoky fire, separate from the others. He stared into the flames, but he did not see the past. He saw nothing. He was hollow. The man who had wept, who had kissed, who had felt the stirrings of a new life, was gone. He had died on Cora's porch, with the word hired help. He was in this dead state for a week. He ate what was given, slept on the frozen ground, and hauled iron. He was waiting for nothing. The raid came just before dawn. It was not soldiers. It was the vigilantes from the town, Hatcher's people, men fueled by whiskey and a terror of the shadows. They rode down into the ravine not with a warning, but with blazing rifles and torches. "Clean 'em out!" a voice screamed. The camp erupted in chaos. The Apache, armed with little more than knives and clubs, scattered. Tari was on his feet, his knife in his hand, before he was even fully awake. It was a slaughter. A bullet tore through the flesh of his left shoulder. Spinning him around, he grunted, ignored the fire, and plunged his knife into the chest of a man leaping from a horse. Another shot. The bullet struck the iron rail he was standing near, sending hot metal splinters into his side. He fought not for life, but from pure, empty instinct. He was a warrior. He would not be shot in the back. He saw a small child, a girl, running for the creek bed. A rider was bearing down on her, his pistol raised. Tari bellowed, a sound of pure rage, and threw himself at the horse. He pulled the man from the saddle. They fell, and he felt a sharp, blinding pain as the man's knife slid deep into his ribs. Tari's hands closed around the man's throat. He squeezed until the struggling stopped. He staggered to his feet, blood pouring from his side and shoulder. The camp was burning. The screaming had mostly stopped. He could hear the vigilantes laughing, finishing their work. He stumbled into the darkness, into the icy water of the creek, and crawled into a thicket of thorns. He lay there, his body on fire, the cold water numbing his legs, and listened to the murderers ride away. He lay there for a full day. The cold kept him from bleeding to death. When he finally crawled out, he was barely alive. The camp was a smoking ruin, the snow stained black and red. He knew then there was no place in this territory, not in the towns, not in the cabins, and not in the ravines. He had to leave. He would go north, into the Ute territory, or perhaps keep walking until the mountains swallowed him. But first, there was one last thing. He could not leave her. It took him another day to walk back, each step a universe of pain. He was dying. He knew it. The wound in his side was deep, poisoned. He moved in a haze of fever and cold. He reached the ridge above her cabin as the sun was setting. The light was a deep, bloody red. He staggered, holding his side, and made his way not to the cabin, but to the small stand of oaks. He collapsed against the trunk of a tree, looking at the cairn of stones he had built for Nita. He was so weak. He slid down to his knees. He looked at the grave, at the red light on the rocks. "I am sorry. Nita," he whispered. His voice cracked. The fever was making him see her face. "I could not protect you. I could not. I am coming to you now. I am tired." He reached out a bloody hand and touched the nearest stone. "I thought you would be," a voice said. He spun, his knife appearing in his hand, a movement of pure reflex that cost him. A wave of blackness swam over his vision. Cora stood 10 feet away. She was barefoot. Her feet were blue with cold, covered in mud and snow. But this time, she was not empty-handed. She was holding the heavy double-barreled shotgun, and it was not pointed at the ground. "I heard about the raid at the scrap camp," she said, her voice shaking, but not with fear, with rage. "I came looking. I found them. The bodies." "I did not find yours. I knew you would come here." He stared at her. This impossible woman, barefoot, with a shotgun. "You are hurt," she said, her eyes tracing the blood that covered his torso. "I am dying," he said. It was a simple fact. "Leave me, Cora Bell. They will see you. Hatcher was here. He will bring the marshal." "Let him come," she said. She walked toward him, the shotgun held steady. "I have been running my whole life. Tari, I ran from my father's temper. I ran from Silas's hands. I ran from myself in that cabin. When you walked away, I ran from that, too. I hid. I made excuses." She stopped, just out of his reach. "I am done running," she said, her voice breaking. "I am done being afraid of what men say. I am done being afraid of love. I am done." She looked at the wound in his side, and her gaze hardened into something he had never seen before. It was a frontier gaze, hard as iron, forged in loss and defiance. "If they want to hang me for sleeping with an Apache," she said, her voice low and fierce, "they will have to kill me too." She let the shotgun rest in the crook of her arm. She was not aiming it at him. She was aiming it at the entire world. He looked at her, at this woman of fire and snow, and the dead thing inside him flickered. He saw her, not the frightened widow, not the liar. He saw the truth she had just spoken. He tried to stand, to tell her to go, to save herself, but he was too weak. He pitched forward. She caught him. The shotgun clattered to the snow. She, so small, somehow braced his massive, falling weight. "No," she grunted, her arms wrapped around him, holding him up. "You do not get to die. Do you hear me? I will not let you." He looked into her face, inches from his. Her eyes were wild. "You are air," he whispered, the fever twisting his words. "I cannot breathe." He kissed her, or she kissed him. It did not matter. It was a collision. It was not tender. It was a desperate, raw claiming. It tasted of his blood and her tears. It was the kiss of a dying man and a woman who refused to let him go. She lowered him gently to the snow, his back against the stones of his wife's grave. He was shaking, the fever taking him. "You are so cold," he muttered. "It does not matter," she said. She ripped a long strip of fabric from her petticoat, her hands working with frantic, competent speed. She pressed it hard against the wound in his side. He roared in pain, his back arching. "Hold still," she commanded. "This is going to hurt." She did not go back to the cabin for supplies. There was no time. She used what she had. She tore more strips, binding his ribs tightly, creating a crude, desperate pressure bandage. He watched her, his vision blurring, her hands covered in his blood, her face fierce and focused. When she was done, he was shaking violently. The cold was sinking into him. "We have to go," she said. "We cannot go to the cabin. They will look there first." "I cannot walk. Cora." "I will carry you," she said. He laughed, a dry, painful sound. "You cannot." "Watch me." She tried. She could not. He was too heavy. He lay in the snow, the red light fading from the sky, the deadly cold of the night setting in. She looked at him, her chest heaving. She lay down beside him. "What are you doing?" he rasped. "If you are going to freeze, I am freezing too," she said, her teeth chattering. She pulled his heavy arm over her, pressing her body against his uninjured side, sharing her meager warmth. He looked at her, at the absolute, insane stubbornness in her eyes. The flicker inside him caught. It became a small, hot flame. He was dying, but this woman was offering him her own life. "You are a fool, Cora Bell," he whispered. "I am your fool," she whispered back. She kissed him again, this time slow, deep. The world was snow and stone and blood, and her mouth. It was not a joining of passion as they had known by the fire. It was something far more raw. It was a desperate, wild attempt to share life, to anchor him to the world. His hands, no longer bandaged, though still scarred, tangled in her hair. Her hands traced the map of his body, the old scars, the new wounds, as if memorizing him, as if reclaiming every part of him from the death that was circling. There, in the snow, under the gaze of the first stars, against the cold stones of his wife's grave, they held each other. It was a slow, agonizing, and beautiful fight. It was a promise sealed not in words, but in shared breath, in the heat of skin against the killing cold. After, they lay shivering. The fever had not broken, but the shaking had eased. The warmth she had given him had pulled him back from the edge. "Now," she said, her voice muffled against his chest, "we go. I still cannot walk. You will." She got up, her own body aching with cold. She pulled him, grunting, to his feet. He leaned on her, a collapsing giant, and together they staggered. They did not go to the cabin. They went to the small, dark root cellar dug into the hill behind it. She laid him down in the freezing dark, on sacks of potatoes. "Do not move." She ran to the cabin. She was not a victim. She was a woman preparing for war. She reappeared minutes later, carrying the furs from the hearth. She wrapped him in them. Then she was gone again. She returned with a small tin box. "My money. Silas never found it. It is $22. She had a satchel. She had loaded it with salt pork, hardtack, her box of salve, and ammunition for the shotgun. Tari looked at her. He had $2 silver in his pouch, the ones he had tried to use for Nita's coffin. "It is not enough," he said. "It will have to be," she said. "We will take the one chicken. We will leave tonight. We will go north. You said you would go north." He looked at her, at the sheer, impossible strength of her. He had left her because he thought she belonged to the world of lies. But she did not. She belonged to no world but the one she was making right now, in the dark, with blood on her hands and a shotgun by her side. "They will follow us," he said. "Let them," Cora Bell said, pressing a canteen of water to his lips. "I have the rifle." They moved under the cover of night. For the first 2 days, Tari was a dead weight, leaning on Cora's small frame, his breath coming in ragged, fevered gasps. The wound in his side was seeping, and the one in his shoulder ached with every jarring step. Cora was relentless. She was no longer a widow. She was a mule, a soldier, a shield. She half dragged, half carried him north, away from the canyon, away from the world that had tried to kill them both. They followed the high, dangerous ridges, avoiding the main passes. They ate handfuls of snow for water and chewed on strips of the smoked chicken she had grabbed. The $22 from her tin box and his $2 silver were pressed flat in a pouch inside her dress. It was their entire world. On the 3rd day, the fever broke. Tari woke from a fitful sleep, his mind clear for the first time. He was lying in a shallow granite overhang, and Cora was asleep, sitting upright against the rock, the heavy shotgun across her lap, her body still protectively angled toward his. He looked at her. Her face was gaunt, bruised by exhaustion. Her hands, wrapped in rags, were raw. She had done this. She had pulled him from the grave. A feeling so powerful it eclipsed his grief and his pain moved through him. It was a fierce, protective awe. He sat up, his sides screaming in protest. She woke instantly, the shotgun lifting. "It is just me," he said, his voice a dry rasp. She blinked, the feral look in her eyes softening. You are awake. The fever is gone. You are barefoot, he said, looking at her feet, which she had wrapped in strips of blanket. They were a bloody, bruised mess. We need to keep moving, she said, ignoring his observation. No. He reached into the satchel and pulled out his knife. She flinched. A small, residual fear. He did not point it at her. He used it to cut away a thick, pliable piece of bark from a willow growing near the meltwater. Then he carefully, painstakingly, carved. He worked for an hour, his hands stiff and clumsy, but his focus absolute. He carved a small, thick ring. Then he took a thread from her wool scarf, the one she had wrapped his hands with, and wove it around the bark, binding it, making it soft. He held it out to her. She stared at it. In my tribe, he said, his voice low, we do not have papers. We have promises. You are my wife. If we are to walk in their world, we will walk as one. Cora's eyes filled with tears. She held out her left hand, her fingers trembling. He slid the rough, warm ring onto her third finger. It was a perfect fit. My name is T, he said. Tari is Apache. T is just T, a laborer, a half-breed. My wife is Cora. We are going north, looking for work. She nodded, the tears rolling hot down her cold cheeks. T and Cora, I like that. They traveled for 3 more weeks. They moved slowly, healing. He taught her how to walk silently, how to read the snow for rabbit tracks. She tended his wounds, the salve and clean water working slowly, the flesh knitting back together. They became a unit, a 2-person tribe, bound by the bark ring and the shared shadow of death. They finally limped into Drybone, a cluster of raw pine shacks clinging to the side of a mountain. It was a mining town, smelling of sulfur, blasting powder, and unwashed men. The main street was a river of mud, and the saloon was the largest building, its bat-wing doors swinging open to reveal a haze of blue smoke. Tensions were high. A banner hanging from the assayer's office read, "No Apache labor. This is a white man's camp." We cannot stay here, Cora whispered, pulling her scarf tighter. We must, T said. His voice was steady. He had tucked his long hair under the brim of a worn hat he had found. We have $3 left. We need food. We need a stake to go further north. They practiced their story. He was half Ute, not Apache, passing through. His quiet, reserved nature and Cora's fierce, protective presence got them a room in a dilapidated boarding house run by a weary-eyed woman named Mrs. Gable. Cora, with her forthright gaze and no-nonsense air, got work. The Lucky Gulp saloon needed a cook. The previous one had been run off after a brawl. The owner, a fat, sweating man named Sal, hired her on the spot, agreeing to pay her $1 a day, plus meals. T found work at the mine. It was hauling. He was to push a heavy iron cart filled with slag from the mine entrance to the dumping field. A mile-long round trip. It was brutal, back-breaking labor, but his immense strength, even weakened, made him ideal. He was paid 50 cents a day. They fell into a routine. They woke before dawn. Cora went to the saloon kitchen, a hot, greasy hell populated by 3 weary prostitutes who also served as barmaids. T went to the mine, his face kept low, his hat pulled down. They met after dark in their small, cold room, shared the food Cora had managed to save, and counted their money. They were building something, a small, fragile hope. They had saved almost $12. The recognition came on a Saturday night. The saloon was packed. Miners, flush with a week's pay, were drinking heavily. The noise a deafening roar of shouts and laughter. Cora was serving stew, running between the kitchen and the main floor, her face slick with sweat. T had come in the back door, as he always did, to walk her home. He stood near the kitchen, keeping to the shadows, watching her. A miner, his face slack with whiskey, staggered back from the bar, bumping hard into T. "Watch yourself. Breed," the miner slurred. T just steadied the man and tried to step away. The miner squinted, his blurry eyes focusing. He leaned in, his face inches from T's. "Wait, I know you." T froze. "Yeah," the miner said, his voice growing louder, drawing attention. "I know you, from the Prescott settlement. You are that Apache, the one whose wife got herself shot for thieving." Cora heard it. She turned, a heavy pot of stew in her hands. The miner's drunken mind twisted the memory, mixing it with the vigilante rumors. "No, wait, that weren't it. You killed her. That's what Hatcher said. You killed your own wife and ran." The saloon went quiet. All eyes turned to T. "That is an Apache," someone shouted. "Right here, the sign says no Apache." "He is a murderer," the first miner roared, pointing a shaking finger. "A wife killer." The air turned electric. Men stood up, kicking back chairs. "Lynch him!" a voice cried from the back. "Get a rope!" The crowd surged. Cora acted. She did not scream. She did not plead. She let out a sharp cry and threw the scalding hot pot of stew directly at the first miner's face. He howled, clutching his burning eyes. The men behind him recoiled. In that 1 second of chaos, Cora grabbed T's hand. "The cellar!" she screamed. She knew the saloon better than anyone. She dragged him through the kitchen, past the shocked faces of the barmaids, and shoved open the back door. The lynch mob was already pouring into the kitchen behind them. She kicked open the heavy-angled doors of the root cellar set into the hillside behind the saloon. "Get in!" He stumbled down the dark, earthy steps. "Cora, no, they will hurt you." "Get in," she shrieked, shoving him. He fell into the damp blackness, landing on sacks of potatoes. Cora slammed the heavy doors and dropped the thick iron bar into its hasp, locking him in. She stood there, her chest heaving, as the mob burst from the back door. "Where is he, girl?" Sal, the owner, yelled, his face purple. "He ran," Cora panted, pointing into the dark alley. "That way, toward the mountain." The mob roared and surged past her, a wave of drunken, angry men with ropes and rifles, disappearing into the darkness. Cora waited until their torches were distant, flickering lights. Then she sank against the cellar doors, her body trembling. She did not wait. She knew they would be back. She ran, not to her room, but to the sheriff's office. The office was a small, quiet box. Sheriff Brody was sitting with his boots on his desk, reading a day-old newspaper. He was a thin man with a drooping mustache and pale, uninterested eyes. "Sheriff," Cora said, breathless. "They are going to lynch my husband. You have to stop them." Brody slowly lowered the paper. "Your husband, that half-breed at the mine. His name is T, and he is innocent. A man accused him of murder, but it is a lie. They killed his first wife, back in Prescott. Vigilantes. I know, I was there." Brody sighed. He began to clean his fingernails with a small knife. "Ma'am, you walk into a mining town with an Apache. You are buying trouble. That sign ain't just decoration." "He is not Apache. He is Ute, and he is my husband. He has done nothing wrong." "He exists," Brody said, not looking up. "That is enough for them. Now, you say he is innocent. They say he is a murderer. That is a lot of angry they, and just one of you. And you, ma'am, pardon my saying, look half mad." "You are the law," Cora cried. "You have to protect him." "The law in Drybone, ma'am, is what keeps the most people quiet. A lynch mob is loud. Me getting myself shot to save a breed who probably ain't worth the bullet. That will just make 'em louder." "So you will do nothing? You will let them kill an innocent man?" "I will," the sheriff said, turning a page. "File a report in the morning. Now, I suggest you go back to your room and lock the door. The mob will be thirsty when they get back." and they will not be particular about who they blame. Cora stared at him, at the absolute placid wall of his indifference. This was the law, a man with his feet on a desk. She left. Her mind was racing, a cold, desperate clarity settling over her panic. There was no law, there was no help, there was only her. She remembered Mr. Finch, a small, nervous clerk from the assayer's office, a man with watery eyes and a respectable wife who ran the church sewing circle. Cora had seen him, twice, slipping out the back gate of Miss Hattie's, the brothel disguised as a seamstress shop. She found him at his desk, working late, the single lamp casting a green shade on his face. He looked up, startled, as she entered. "Mrs. Bell, we are closed." Cora walked to his desk. She placed her raw, red hands flat on his ledger. "I need release papers. Mr. Finch, from the U.S. Marshal and Prescott, saying all charges against my husband, T, were found to be false." Finch laughed, a short, nervous bark. "Are you insane? I cannot just release papers. That is a federal crime." "So is adultery," Cora said, her voice dropping to a flat, cold whisper. Finch's smile vanished. "I do not know what you mean." "I have seen you, Mr. Finch, Tuesday nights, and sometimes on Fridays. The back door of Miss Hattie's, the red-haired girl, Lizzie, I think her name is, your wife, Mrs. Finch. She seems like a proud woman, very active in the church. I wonder how she would feel, knowing her husband spends her sewing circle money on seamstress lessons." Finch went the color of ash. His hands were shaking. You would not. He is in a root cellar," Cora said, her voice shaking with a contained fury. "They are going to hang him for something he did not do. I need those papers. I need them to look official. I need them now. Or I will walk from this office to your house, and I will tell your wife. Then I will go to the church, and I will tell the preacher. By morning, you will have nothing." Efemic stared at her, seeing the absolute, unblinking resolve in her eyes. She was not bluffing. She was a woman who had already lost everything once. What do you want them to say?" he whispered, pulling a sheet of official-looking paper from a drawer. He had access to the telegraph forms. "They are to say, by order of Marshal Kane, Prescott, all charges against Tari, also known as T, dismissed. False accusation, man cleared. To be released immediate." Finch's hand trembled as he wrote, imitating the script of a telegraph operator. He took a stamp from his drawer and slammed it on the bottom, the ink bleeding. "Will that work?" he pleaded. "It will have to," Cora said. She snatched the paper, not bothering with a thank you, and ran. She did not go to the mob. They were still combing the mountain. She went back to the cellar. She threw open the doors. T was standing in the darkness, his knife in his hand. He was weak, cold, but ready. "We are leaving," she said, pulling him out. "We are going back to the room. We are getting our money and the satchel. Cora, the mob. The mob is on the mountain. We are walking out the front road, in plain sight. They will stop us." "No, they will not," she said, shoving the forged paper into his hand. "Because you are a free man." They gathered their things. They walked out of the boarding house and onto the muddy main street. A few men, stragglers from the mob, saw them. "Hey, there he is." They started to gather, their faces ugly. Cora stepped in front of T, holding the shotgun. "He is a free man," she shouted, her voice ringing in the cold night air. "Look, a telegraph from the marshal. The charges were false." She held up the paper. The men paused, confused. They could not read it from that distance, but it looked official. It had a stamp. Their drunken certainty wavered. "Sheriff Brody!" Cora screamed toward his office. "Show them! It is over!" Brody appeared on his porch. He looked at Cora. He looked at the paper she was waving. He looked at the gathering. Angry men. He spat into the mud. "You heard the lady," he drawled, his voice carrying, "Paper from the marshal. Man's free. Go home. The show is over." He turned and went back inside, slamming his door. The men grumbled, cheated of their blood, but the sheriff had spoken. The official paper, even unseen, had broken their certainty. They slowly dispersed. Cora and T did not run. They walked. They walked down the center of the street, past the saloon, past the assayer's office, and out of Drybone. They did not stop until they were miles into the mountains. High up, where the pines were thick and the wind was a sharp, cold blade, they found a shallow cave, little more than a hollow in the rock, and collapsed. Tari was shaking, not from cold, but from rage. He grabbed Cora's arm. His grip was hard enough to bruise. "You should have left me," he hissed, his face close to hers. "In the cellar. You should have run." "I will not leave you," she said, her teeth chattering. "You forged papers. You blackmailed a man. You lied to a town. They will find out. They will send marshals, maybe soldiers. Not just for me. Now, for you. You are a criminal. I am bringing you death. Cora, do you not see that?" Cora looked at him, her eyes blazing in the moonlight. She was done. Done with his grief. Done with his guilt. Done with his noble attempts to save her. She slapped him. Hard. He recoiled, stunned. "You think this is about you?" she whispered, her voice a low, fierce hiss. "You think I care about their laws, their papers? Silas used their laws to beat me. Hatcher used their laws to threaten me. That sheriff used their laws to let you die. Their laws are garbage." She grabbed the front of his shirt, her small, raw hands fisting in the material. "I do not care about their world. I do not care about their rules. I care about this." She jabbed a finger at his chest. "You are my man. You are my home, and I will bury anyone who says otherwise." The words hung in the freezing air, a vow more binding than any paper. He stared at her, at the raw, wild, magnificent strength of her. This was not the woman he had saved. This was the woman who had just saved him. He pulled her to him. It was not a kiss of tenderness. It was a collision. It was possessive, fierce, and desperate. It was a claiming. He kissed her like she was air, and he had been suffocating. He held her, his arms locking around her like steel bands, as if he could forge them into one person, one defiant being that the world could never break apart. They clung to each other in the cold cave, a small, stubborn fire against the vast, killing darkness. They traveled north, higher than any wagon trail, deeper than any map. They climbed into the high granite teeth of the mountains, where the air was thin and the only sound was the wind. The pursuit from Drybone, if it ever came, was lost in the canyons far below. They were ghosts. Spring found them. It came not as a gentle green, but as a violent thaw. The snowpack melted, and the creeks became white, raging rivers. They followed one upstream for 2 days, until the canyon walls narrowed, then suddenly opened up. It was a valley, a high mountain bowl, sheltered on all sides by sheer cliffs of gray granite. A creek, wide and clear, ran through the center. The floor was flat, covered in rich soil, and thick with pine and aspen. It was untouched. It was defensible. It was a place no one would find by accident. T dropped the satchel. He looked at the valley, at the clear water, at the game trails leading into the aspen. Cora stood beside him, her hand, with its bark ring, clutching his. "Here," he said. It was not a question. They worked. They were skeletal, worn down by the winter and the running, but the valley gave them a new, fierce energy. T began the cabin. He would not build like a white man, in a hurry, with shoddy materials. He chose each log, felling the trees with the axe he had taken from Silas's shed. He notched them with his knife, fitting them so precisely no wind could find a way through. He built the hearth first, with river stones, solid and deep. Every movement was deliberate, a prayer in labor. Cora, the daughter of a failed farmer, found the earth was in her blood. She cleared a patch of land near the creek, her hands, raw and blistered, turning the dark, rich soil. They walked for 2 days to a tiny trading post, a single shack on a high pass. With the last of their $12, she bought a small sack of pinto beans, a pound of corn seed, a packet of squash seeds, and a single, heavy cast-iron skillet. They did not speak of the past. They did not speak of the future. They lived in the hard, bright present. They were T and Cora. He hunted. She gardened. At night, they fell onto the pallet of furs, too tired to speak, and slept in each other's arms. They were building a fortress, not of logs, but of shared, silent purpose. Summer came, hot and bright. The days were long. The corn was knee-high. The small cabin had 4 walls and a roof of packed earth and pine. Cora felt a new, unfamiliar exhaustion. She was tired, not just from the work, but deep in her bones. She chalked it up to the altitude, the hard work. Her body was healing. One afternoon, she was by the creek, washing their few clothes, scrubbing them on a flat rock. A cramp seized her, sudden and sharp. It was not a muscle pain. It was a deep, internal, tearing agony. It dropped her to her knees. She gasped, a small, choked sound. She looked down. Blood. A dark, sudden bloom in the clear creek water, swirling away from her. She did not understand. The pain came again, a heavy, bearing down clench that stole her breath. "T!" she screamed. He was at the cabin, splitting wood. He heard the panic in her voice. He was at her side in an instant, his shadow falling over her. He saw her face, white with shock. He saw the blood. He did not ask. He understood. He lifted her, as he had that first day, and carried her into the cabin, laying her gently on the furs. It was a small, secret, violent war. Her body, starved and strained for a year, had held on to a new life, but it could not keep it. The pain came in waves, hard and unforgiving. She did not know what was happening until it was over. He cleaned her, his hands gentle, his face a mask of stone. He took the bloody rags and the small, devastating evidence of what might have been, and he buried them, far from the cabin, under the pines. When he returned, she was lying on her side, facing the log wall. She was perfectly still. The grief was a physical weight, a cold stone in her belly. She had been pregnant. She had been carrying his child, and it was gone. "I lost it," she whispered to the wall. "I did not even know." T sat on the floor, his back against the hearth he had built. He did not go to her. He did not touch her. He stared at his hands, the ones that had just buried his second child. He was back in the dusty street in Prescott. He was kneeling over Nita. He was in the ravine, the smell of burning flesh in his nostrils. He was a curse. Death walked with him, and it had finally, truly, touched her. "It is the way of things," he said. His voice was dead, flat, empty. "What I love, I destroy. I brought this to you." His words, his terrible, quiet resignation, struck her like a slap. The grief, cold and hollow, ignited. It became a hot, white rage. She pushed herself up, her body screaming in protest. "The way of things," she hissed, her voice a low, trembling snarl. "Do not say that to me. Do not you dare." She scrambled off the pallet, standing over him, her body shaking. "I did not walk barefoot through a blizzard for you. I did not hold your guts in my hands. I did not lie to a lynch mob and blackmail a man just to hear you say it is the way of things." He looked up, his face dark, his eyes shuddered. "You do not understand." "I understand," she screamed, the word tearing from her throat. I understand that I am tired of fighting a ghost. I am not her. I am not Nita. I am here. I am alive. I am bleeding. And what we just lost was ours. Do not speak her name, he roared, the sound exploding from him. A year of suppressed agony. He shot to his feet, towering over her. I will speak her name, Cora cried, refusing to back down, her hands clenched into fists. She is always here. She is in the rocks you piled. She is in the bed with us every night. I am trying to build a life with you, and you are still in that canyon. You are still carrying her. You have not set her down. You have not chosen me. The accusation hung in the small, hot cabin. It was the truth, the one raw, unspoken truth between them. He looked at her, his chest heaving, the rage inside him, the rage at the men who killed his wife, at the vigilantes, at the world, had nowhere to go. He turned and swept his arm across the crude shelf, sending her tin plates, the cups, the precious skillet, crashing to the dirt floor. They murdered her, he bellowed. They shot her for a sack of flour, and I brought you here. I gave you this sickness, death. It is all I have. It is all I am. I chose this, she sobbed, the rage breaking, the grief pouring out. I chose you. I keep choosing you. But you are not here. You are still back there. You have to let her go. He stared at her, his face ravaged. He turned and stalked from the cabin. He went to the creek, the place where she had bled. He stood on the bank, the roar of the water filling his ears, and he shook. He was a warrior. He was a builder. And he was a coward. He was afraid. Cora followed him. She was weak, aching, but she would not let him walk away. Not this time. She stood 10 feet behind him. Are you going? She asked, her voice flat, exhausted. Are you going to walk away again? Because I am not chasing you this time. Tari, I am done chasing. If you walk now, you walk forever. He turned, slowly. The mask was gone. His face was a ruin of pain. He was not the stone giant. He was the man who had wept in the dark, the man who had bled in the snow. I am afraid, he whispered. The admission tore from his throat. She is gone. The baby is gone. If I let her memory go, if I give all of myself to you, and I lose you, Cora, I will be nothing. I will be dust. The fight left her. She saw him, finally. I am right here, she said, her voice breaking. I am not a ghost. I am not dust. I am your wife, and I am hurting. Please. He crossed the distance between them in one stride. He did not pull her to him. He collapsed into her. He buried his face in her neck, his arms wrapping around her as if she were the only solid thing in the world. He anchored himself to her, and he wept. He wept for Nita. He wept for the child they had just lost. He wept for his people, for the world he had lost. And he wept for the sheer, terrifying relief of finally, letting her go. Cora held him, her own tears soaking his hair, her hands stroking his back, and she held him as he broke, and as he healed. You are everything, he rasped against her skin, the words she had been starving to hear. Cora, you are my sky, you are my ground, you are not my past, you are my life. He held her face between his hands, his rough thumbs wiping away her tears. He kissed her, a kiss of shared sorrow, a kiss of renewal. The grief, the rage, the fear, it did not vanish. It settled. It changed. It became the hard, granite foundation beneath their feet. He lifted her, carrying her to the soft, mossy bank under the aspens. They lay down, and there, by the creek, they came together. It was not the desperate passion of the cave, or the uncertain heat of the cabin. It was a slow, deliberate, and sacred promise. They were turning their scars into armor. They were forging their losses into a new, stronger life. 1 year later, the valley was a home. The cabin was finished, with a small, neat porch and a window, T had traded 30 cured rabbit skins for. The garden was a patchwork of green, corn, beans, squash. Inside, in the bed he had built, Cora was giving birth. It was not the short, violent pain of before. It was a long, powerful, life-giving labor. T was there. He did not leave her side. He held her hands. He wiped her face. He spoke to her in low, steady Apache, words of strength, words of the earth. After 6 hours, as the sun began to set, the cabin was filled with a new sound, a loud, healthy, demanding cry. T cut the cord with his knife. He washed the baby in a wooden basin, his massive, scarred hands impossibly gentle. He wrapped her in a clean, soft deer hide. Cora lay back, exhausted and weeping with joy. He brought the child to her. It was a girl. She was perfect. She had a thick shock of his own black hair, and when she opened her eyes, they were Cora's, pale and clear as the creek water. "Oh," Cora breathed, touching the baby's cheek. "She is beautiful." T looked at his daughter, his face transformed by a love so fierce it was almost painful. This was not a ghost. This was real. "What is her name?" Cora whispered. T looked at his wife, his eyes holding hers. A long, quiet question. "Nita," he said, his voice thick. Cora's breath caught. She searched his face. There was no shadow there, only love, only the present. "Nita," he said again. "In my language, it means bear. It is not a memory. It is a promise. She is our strength, our protection, our rebirth." Cora smiled, the tears rolling into her hair. "Nita," she whispered, kissing the baby's head. "Our Nita. It is perfect." Another year passed. Nita was a toddler, a strong, bold child who chased the chickens and laughed at the wind. The valley was their world, complete and safe. One afternoon in the late summer, Cora was outside, hanging dried herbs from the rafters of the porch. Nita was playing in the dirt at her feet. A sound? Horses. Cora froze. She snatched Nita. She ran into the cabin, barred the door, and grabbed the shotgun. She placed Nita in her cradle, then stood by the window, her body rigid, the gun leveled. 3 men on horseback rode into the clearing. They were not lawmen. They were not vigilantes. They were pulling a wagon, loaded with plows, crates, and furniture. They stopped, their eyes taking in the neat cabin, the curl of smoke from the chimney. Cora stepped onto the porch. She did not hide. She stood in the open, the shotgun held steady, her face hard as iron. She was a different woman from the one who had opened the door to a grieving stranger 3 years before. The man in the lead was older, with a graying beard. He saw her. He immediately took off his hat. He held up his hand, palm out. "Ma'am," he called, his voice calm. "We mean no harm. We are settlers, just looking for a place to put down roots." "This valley is taken," Cora said, her voice flat and cold. "We see that, ma'am. A fine-looking claim," the man said. He looked at her, at the gun, at the sheer, defiant set of her jaw. He nodded, as if he understood something. We heard about this valley. We heard about you two." Cora's grip tightened on the gun. "What did you hear?" The man smiled, a small, weary smile. "We came from Drybone. Ma'am, we heard what you did, how you stared down Sheriff Brody and walked out with your man. We heard you two vanished into the high country. We figured, any folks tough enough to do that, well, they must be good folks, honest folks." He paused, and his gaze was direct. "The towns down there, they are full of poison and rules that do not make sense. We are not here to take sides. We are not here to cause trouble. We are just looking to build something honest." Cora stared at him. She looked past him, at the wagon. A woman was peering out, holding a small child. The world had returned, but it was not Hatcher. It was not Abernathy. It was a family. Just then, T emerged from the trees, silent as a shadow. A buck was slung over his shoulders. His knife was in his hand. He saw the men, and he stopped, his eyes cold. The lead settler saw him and nodded respectfully. "Sir." T looked at the men. He looked at Cora. He saw her finger on the trigger, but he also saw the tension leaving her shoulders. He walked forward and stood beside her on the porch. He put his free hand on her shoulder. Cora reached up and took his hand, her fingers lacing with his. The rough, bark ring was still there, worn smooth by work and time. They stood together, hand in hand, the Apache warrior and the settler widow, a unit. The settler put his hat back on. "We will move on, up the creek, a ways. There is room for all, I reckon. Good day to you, ma'am, sir." He clicked to his horses, and the wagon creaked away, leaving them in peace. T and Cora stood on the porch, watching them go. The smoke from their chimney rose straight into the deep blue sky, a thin ribbon of their own making. From inside the cabin, a new sound drifted out. Nita had woken up. She was not crying. She was laughing, a bright, clear sound that echoed in the quiet valley, untouched by fear. Thank you for listening to this story. I truly appreciate you spending your time with me. Please, take a moment to comment and let me know where in the world you are listening from. If you enjoyed this, I hope you will subscribe to From Wild West, so you do not miss the next story. And finally, I would love to hear your thoughts on Cora and Tari's journey. Please share them in English in the comments.